It's an incredibly strange day in the world of Magic the Gathering. Wizards of the Coast has just released the newest batch of spoiler cards for Duskmourn House of Horror. And for some inexplicable reason, the set contains aliens. Aliens in a Magic the Gathering world. What is going on?
Magic. I am a wizard! History. I'm an old wizard! The magic historian. My bones hurt.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, I hope the day finds you well because we have gathered for another glorious installment of Mega Magic News. We're going to be looking at more cards from Duskmourn. The obvious, most confusing one to me has to be the alien card, which I still can't 100% understand. Maybe you guys can help me figure out why they're doing it. But there are some other interesting cards to talk about from power perspective or from design perspective. So with that being said, let's take a look at the cards. We're starting off with Eye Sanity. Feast your eyeballs on this eyeball. 1 blue and 2 for Abhorrent Oculus. And when I read the name, my first thought was the Oculus Rift is really getting out of hand. So, how does this work? As an additional cost to cast this spell, you have to exile 6 cards from your graveyard, which does limit the card's power. But what do you get for that? You get a 5/5 flyer. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Manifest Dreads. You're going to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, pick one to put face down as a 2/2 creature, and if it happens to be a creature, you'll even have the ability to turn it face up later. So, a pretty strong ability that scales with the number of players that you have in the game. So obviously, Commander players are going to be even more jazzed about this. And it's not difficult for blue to feed the graveyard full of cards. And on top of that, with this cheap casting cost, you're going to be able to have counter magic to back up any destruction your opponent has to try and get rid of this. You're going to have your eye on the prize at all times. The artwork is pretty wild. It looks like the eyeball of a god that's been torn from its socket and hurtled downwards. But then around the actual pupil, you have these crazy little claws as well. It is a horrific beast in scale. I do like the individuals that we see here facing off against it to really give you the sense of its nightmarish proportions. And this is all inside the house of Valgavoth, Duskmourn, right? So this is literally in a room where you have this water. You can see the little pathway has been broken up. There's these jutting pieces of stone that you could leap from one to another. This place has sharks in it and everything. We've seen those on previous cards. So this is a pretty terrifying scenario, and just the whole idea of a dislodged eye. Like, where did this come from? Is it part of a larger beast, or was this just some individual's eye that swelled up with demonic evil and became this ultimate horror? Interestingly enough, its creature type is just eye. I'd figure this would be a horror as well, but beefcakey, right? Moving on, we've got Midnight Mayhem. Now, I included this one because I think it represents how far down the line Magic has gone with insane power. This is an uncommon that costs a white, a red, and 2. It's a sorcery that lets you create 3 1/1 red gremlin creature tokens. Gremlins you control gain menace, lifelink, and haste until end of turn. Now, this makes 3 1/1 lifelink haste tokens, and it feels like ultimately, and I mean, it does give those bonuses to any other gremlins you have as well, but it feels like ultimately this isn't strong enough as a Magic card, which is bonkers to somebody like me who's been around since the beginning. And it's like, yo, we would have been all over this card years ago. You wouldn't even have to go back to the beginning for this to be powerful enough. But now it just feels like something that'll make a dent in draft games where you'll just be like, oh, not the Gremlin army again, right? The flavor text says, they might look funny, but when all those teeth sink into your flesh, you won't be laughing. And I have to admit, out of all the cards with the gremlins on them, this is the only one where they actually feel like a real problem. The other ones, they look pretty cutesy, eating candles and stuff like that, being little friends. This totally has the vibe of, we're gonna mess you up. And it ties, obviously, into the Gremlin movies, right? Midnight Mayhem, the whole don't feed your gremlins after midnight concept. It's a very clear tie-in, and you can see them tearing up a banquet, which just looks normal. The way that duskmourn was presented to us, you wouldn't expect to see rooms that pretty much have a regular style feast in them, but here we are. The gremlins are having a ball. So again, I just wanted to show this to talk about how much the power level has changed in Magic the Gathering. Then we've got Unable to Scream. I love the flavor of this card so much. So, 1 blue for an enchantment that you obviously have to put on a creature. Enchanted creature loses all ability and is a toy artifact creature with base power and toughness 0-2 in addition to its other types. As long as enchanted creature is face down, it can't be turned face up. I do like the fact that they included that in case you want to deal with any morph creatures, if you want to deal with obviously manifested dread creatures, it shuts down their ability to flip up and get any kind of bonus. It is a little bit wild to me that the toy has this Medusa vibe. There's a part of me that wonders, is this kind of what happened to Vraska for a bit in the story and they just didn't let us know? Because Jace and Vraska are looking for loot in the story, and later on Valgavoth ends up with loot, but we have no idea how we got there. And the hair of this gives me a Gorgon snake, but ultimately neutered in power kind of feel. And the idea of being trapped inside of a doll. So you're inside this tiny little helpless being. It's just a 0-2, so you can barely take any damage. You can't do any damage. You have no mouth. I have no mouth, and yet I must scream. This is the kind of reference to that. And you think about it, you'd be wandering around in the house going, well, I'm host now. There's a house full of horrors, and I'm completely defenseless. A soul trapped in a tiny little doll. Pretty cool. Moving on. We've got Valgavoth's Onslaught. Now, this is something I would have loved to have seen in the story, because to be real, Valgavoth in the written story just knocks somebody down with one of his wings. That's all he does in the story. Like, out of every villain we've ever had, Valgavoth in the written story has the least impact. I mean, everyone else is like, I'm going to take over the world, and then the multiverse. But Valgavoth's already taken over his whole world, and he's just like, I just want some new people to eat, right? So, Anyways, 1 green and double X, manifest dread X times, then put X +1/+1 counters on each of those creatures. Double X is a lot of mana, let's be real. Like, if you pay 3 mana, you're going to get to manifest dread once and put 1 +1/+1 counter on it. 5's going to get you 2, 7's going to get you 3. So you're going to get 3 creatures that are 2/2 bases that have 3 +1/+1 counters on them. So 3 5/5s for 7 mana is all right, but by today's standards, I don't think it's really going to tip the scale that much. The flavor text says, Tyvar and the Wanderer were done running. I wanted to see this moment in the story. This is what I was expecting. A massive, gigantic Valgavoth throwing endless hordes of horrors at you instead of Valgavoth and a handful of human cultists. And then he's like, boom, I knocked you down for a second. Oh, you naughty boy, don't bump me, right? Like, this artwork is staggering in what's going on. This feels like a climactic end battle confrontation. This is what we deserved in the story. Moving on, we've got Enduring Courage. So this is obviously one of the glimmers. The glimmers are aspects of people's souls, basically the embodiment of hope. So Enduring Courage is 2 red and 2 for a 3/3 dog. It's a glimmer as well, obviously, and counts as an enchantment creature, which is noteworthy because there's a lot of cards that care about enchantments in this set and previous Magic sets. Whenever another creature you control enters, it gets +2/+0 and gets haste until end of turn. And when Enduring Courage dies, if it was a creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's an enchantment, it's not a creature. So even after your opponent ices it out or you sacrifice it to something, you're still going to gain the benefit of all your guys getting haste and +2 power, which is nothing to sneeze at. In things like my cube, I get terrified when my opponent slaps one of these kind of cards down, because it's like, great, now all your big nasties are going to be able to swing in the turn they show up, and they get a power boost. And it even makes little 1/1 donks scary. Like that gremlin card that we looked at back there, it changes its face when you add this to it. Because now all of a sudden, they're 3/1 power, right? Well, they're 3 power, 1 toughness creatures coming in a squad. And that's 9 damage right there. So, not too shabby. People love dogs, so that's going to go over well. This definitely feels like the aspect of duskmourn where it's charging through. I assume it's on its way to rescue somebody. So, good flavor on this, good power on this. Moving on. We've got Fear of Abduction. Duskmourn just has aliens now? That was the biggest overriding feeling I had from all of this. I'm like, wait, what's going on? Why is there a giant Xenos in here? The Emperor would be displeased. This is heresy, all right? So, Fear of Abduction, 2 white and 4 for a 5/5 enchantment nightmare. As an additional cost to cast this spell, exile a creature you control. It's got flying. When it enters, when it enters, exile target creature an opponent controls, and when it leaves the battlefield, put each card exiled with it into its owner's hand. So it definitely has a weird feel of the enchantments that we're accustomed to, where white will remove one of your opponent's permanents, like boom, I'm going to put this out for 3, exile one of your guys until the enchantment goes. Normally though, the enchantments return them to play, whereas this puts it into the hand. It doesn't feel very good because you have to get rid of one of your own creatures, right, to make it happen. Sure, you get to exile one of your opponent's creatures, but as soon as they destroy this, that creature's right back in their hand. And you get yours back too, but ultimately, this card is kind of, I mean, in a draft, yeah. I mean, it acts as removal, it's got evasion, and you can just sacrifice one of your little guys to it, and it's not even really a sacrifice because it's just getting exiled. So ultimately, I can see this doing some heavy lifting in the Duskmourn draft environment. But the whole concept of this card is bizarre. Like, it's a house of horror where you're afraid of demons and stuff. Why all of a sudden is there an alien head with a bunch of other alien heads dangling in its eyes? This is honestly, genuinely just baffling. I really don't understand. I mean, at the basis level, I get that Wizards is trying to cram as many different horror types as they can into Duskmourn, but this is the most out of place thing that I've seen in the entirety of the set. It makes no sense. Do the residents of Duskmourn already know about aliens and are afraid of them somehow? Is that what it's supposed to be? Like, well, they watched alien movies on the TV, you see, so now they're terrified. It's so ultimately just very, very jarring. I mean, Magic technically has aliens, but that's only from the one unset where it's a space carnival, and that is definitely not in the actual world of Magic. So now this is in canon references to straight up aliens, which is very, very strange to me. Moving on, we've got Giggling Skitterspike. This is a horrifying card. 4 mana for a 1/1 indestructible toy. Whenever it attacks, blocks, or becomes the target of a spell, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. And for 5 mana, you can use Monstrosity 5, which if you haven't used the ability already, then you get to put 5+1/+1 counters on it. So now it's a 6/6 that's going to do that damage whenever it attacks, whenever it blocks, or becomes the target of a spell. So this definitely feels like a build around me silliness card. It's got a ton of horror vibe. This is the kind of thing I would expect to see in a house of horror. You hear the skittering of what sounds like a crazy spider, and then you're like, is that a bird's cage in the middle? Is that a giant doll's head in the middle? And its eyes just pop open when it's ready to start blasting you. I don't know. Maybe when it becomes monstrous, that's it actually growing out those legs. Who knows? Maybe it's just a cage with a head in it, just rolling around at first, and then when it becomes monstrosity, kunk, 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 and now it's chasing you down the hall, laughing, like, bro, that is horrifying. And it gives the same kind of vibe off as Stuffy Doll, but with way more ways to make the damage happen, right? This is a pretty terrifying card. Moving on, we've got Cayenne Corrupted Memory. This is a really weird include in Duskmourn, and it feels 100% to me like they had this artwork from the original sets involving Strixhaven, either the first Strixhaven set or the Phyrexian Invasion, and they just shoved it into Duskmourn because there's no reason for a random dean of some kind of sorcery from the Strixhaven Magic University to be here. That makes zero sense. In the story, they go, oh, it's because Simone imagined her, and it's like, oh, I watched you die, but it doesn't make any sense. And also, this card doesn't make sense for another reason. Let's talk about what it does, and then I'll talk about what I'm talking about. All right, so 1 blue, 1 green, and 2 for a 2/2 legendary illusion. As long as their power is even, you can cast non-creature spells as if they had flash. As long as their power is odd, you can cast creature spells as though they had flash. Now notice the expansion symbol for this. This was designed for Commander. This is from the Commander deck. And like we recently had the problem with Nadu, where they banned Nadu because he was too strong. He's crazy powerhouse, right? But the original version of Nadu that they changed from was something that granted your spells flash. And they said they didn't want to do that because it ends up annoying people based on other cards that they've created. And yet here they have a commander they created that 100% gives your spells flash. So you just go, wait, what? Make up your minds, guys. What you tell us is very inconsistent. It also has the ability, whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Kion. So I don't actually know how powerful this will be for a commander, but ultimately I included this because it's strange. It doesn't feel like it fits in Duskmourn, and it's strange based on what they told us about Nadu, right? After that, we've got a Shriekwood Devourer. Bro, I love big greeny goodness, and this is awesome. 2 green and 5 for a 7/5 horrific tree folk. It's got trample. Whenever you attack with one or more creatures, untap up to X lands, where X is the greatest power among creatures that you're attacking with, right? So with just this guy attacking, you're going to get to untap 7 lands. But if you don't, like, let's say you just put him out, he doesn't have haste, and you have some other creature that only has 4 power or whatever, you're still going to get to untap 4 lands, like right when you put him out. So that's pretty awesome. And the flavor of it's dope. With every soul it consumes, its roots stretch further and reach for more victims. And it's got these crazy woobly goobly hands. I'm all hands, baby! And you got the multiple faces of the screaming souls that are trapped in the tree. This is epic level horror. And what's going on down here with the green power suffusing it? Is that just full on soul energy and it's using that to grow? Instead of sunlight, it needs soul light? Like, bro, tell me that's not epic. Then we've got Intruding Soul Rager, which is a very interesting concept. A red and blue for a 2/2 spirit. It has vigilance. Tap it, sacrifice a room, and the Soul Rager deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you draw a card. The flavor text says, the souls of those who perished outside the house persist as fractured echoes, driven to share their misery with the living. This is one of the coolest aspects of Duskmourn. As the house grew, it basically stretched further and further out until it was pretty much butting up against the Blind Eternities. The Blind Eternities are the space that it's all magic planes are held within the Blind Eternities. It's not outer space. It's a completely different, like, planes will have their own certain amount of outer space in the sky above them, depending on the plane. Some do, some don't. But the Blind Eternities is literally like an ethereal realm that exists between all of the planes that completely obliterates anything that goes through it aside from planeswalkers and the Eldrazi. Those are the only ones who can survive the Blind Eternities. Planeswalkers can only travel through them for short bursts. So Duskmourn is stretched out until it's butting up pretty much against the edges of the Blind Eternities around the plane, right? The house is stretched that far. And so the spirits of people whose lives ended outside of the house aren't trapped in Duskmourn, but as the house pushed further and further out, it shoved them up against the Blind Eternities. So these ghosts would be obliterated if they were forced into the Blinded Eternities. So instead, they seep in through cracks in the house's exterior. So you have these crazy glitch ghosts that can enter the house and leave the house, usually only through mirrors and things like that. But this one in particular has the ability to consume rooms, which is, as far as I'm concerned, eating a part of Valgavoth's essence. So this ghost can consume demonic essence, basically destroying part of the house in the process, and then use that, turn it into malevolent energy that damages your enemies and also gains you eldritch knowledge. That is incredible flavor. And I like the fact that the ghost is shown in this double phased out, like I've got two different faces shown in two different moments, all glitched out, both screaming at the same time. And it also gives a nod to the old school 3D glasses, the paper ones that had the red and blue lenses. So for me, this is a very, very evocative card. Now, let's move on to something strange. The Tale of Tamiyo, a blue and 2 for a legendary saga, and it's got the same ability for its first 3 steps. You mill 2 cards. If 2 cards that share a card type were milled this way, draw a card, and then repeat the milling. So this could actually give you a number of card draws off it, but it does it 3 times in a row. And then once you get to the 4th step, you exile any number of target instant, sorcery, and or Tamiyo planeswalker cards from your graveyard, and then you can copy them and cast any number of the copies. You do have to pay the mana cost, though, which is what makes it feel like this card is just okay. It's going to feed a bunch of cards into your graveyard, and then you can cast them or other things that you put into your graveyard. But it might draw you a card each turn for 3 turns. You have to wait until 4 turns, right, for it to really pay off, and it's questionable whether it will pay off. The artwork, to me, is absolutely artwork they already had kicking around. Like, they're trying to go with, oh, Tamiyo got trapped in the ghost ghost trap, and then her essence got obliterated and freed by Nashi, because that happens in the story, right? So, but when you look at the bottom, it just, this totally feels like something that was meant for either the original Kamigawa or, well, not the original Kamigawa, the neon original Kamigawa, or part of the Phyrexian War where Tamiyo got taken out, because this has no aspects of a House of Horror whatsoever, right? So that kind of feels forced, and the card itself is underwhelming. Moving on, we've got They Came from the Pipes. 1 blue and 4 for an enchantment. When it comes out, you get to manifest dread twice. You're going to get 2/2/2s. Whenever a face-down creature you control enters, draw a card. So you're also going to get to draw 2 cards. So for 5 mana, you're making 2/2/2s and drawing 2 cards. And then any other time you manifest dread, you're also going to benefit from the card draw. So on the surface of it, this one is kind of, is it really worth the 5 mana? But it evokes a lot of the horror flavor. I've always found the whole stuff seeping up from the drain pipes, black ichor or blood or whatever else, coming up out of the drain pipes and things like that, to be a pretty scary concept. Where is it coming from? What are you going to do about it, right? It's coming from the depths, and it's going to claim you as it spills over the edge of the sink and flows over the floor. Don't let it touch part of your shoe, or you might be done for, right? And in this particular iteration, take a look at the artwork. This is actually an upside down bathroom. So you come in and there's a bathtub full of this viscid, vile liquid. And you can see it actually pouring out of the bathtub onto the roof it would, as if gravity's reversed. And so you might walk in at first and that's all you see. And you're like, what is going on? I'm in an upside down bathroom. And then all of a sudden, whomp, 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 these arms are coming for you. This just made me think of Teo. Teo talks about in the War of the Spark story how he loves indoor plumbing. So we might be excited. Oh, goody, a toilet. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute. I don't want nothing to do with this upside down nonsense. So the crazy shadowy hands of pure black grossness coming for you, that's got some real horror flavor to it. After that, we've got Withering Torment, and this helps to solidify the whole black enchantment destruction concept a little bit further, because for the longest time, black wasn't allowed to deal with enchantments at all, really. Black and red were colors that couldn't do anything about enchantments that are already on the board, but they've expanded what colors can do, and ultimately it has muddied the color pie. It just feels more and more like almost every color has almost every ability, and we will probably get there one day with the power creep that's going on with Magic. But before Withering Torment, to be able to destroy a creature or enchantment at instant speed, basically it would cost 1 black and 1, and you would lose life equal to its casting cost. This only costs 1 more than that, and it lets you destroy any creature or enchantment, and you only lose 2 life, which is a huge step up from the life loss perspective, but it also does cost 1 mana more. And considering how fast Magic has gotten, I don't know if it's actually better to just be able to lose 2 life and cast this for 3, or if the 2 mana but lose life equal to its casting cost is straight up better. It remains to be seen, but I thought that it was interesting to see the difference between losing life equal to the casting cost and just 2 is only 1 generic mana, right? The flavor text says, each spindle is the lingering consciousness of the survivor consumed by cellar spawn, a ragged, drifting remnant pulsing with constant psychic agony. That is some absolutely insane flavor, right? And the artwork is incredible. You can see through a shattered mirror on the ground that this dude's life essence is being pulled out of him, and it's turning into a malevolent eye, right? It's got this shadowy, wispy vibe to it, but then why does it have this red, fiery center? Like, it is absolutely terrifying. I love the flavor on this. So this is a great card to end the video off with. And if you like dark and scary things, I'm actually going to be doing a live stream tonight talking about the old 90s movie Dark City, which has some real horrific aspects to it. So if you'd like to come and be part of that conversation, it'll be happening over on my live stream channel. Come on by and say hello, because we're wrapping it up here. A big thank you to my patrons for supporting my channel. You guys rule, and I will see you guys in the next video.